Hello and welcome to part 2 of my Kahn and Neek-type track tutorial. If you haven't seen part 1, I'd recommend watching it first and it'll appear in the top right corner of the screen now. I've put a hyperlink for the assets from video 1 in the description as well. The full track will also appear there. So let's get into it, starting with the intro, and this is the premix version of the project. The intro is 24 bars. It begins with the wobbly saw bass, which has the sub-frequencies filtered out alongside the ambient grime pad. The wobbly saw bass is playing the root note and the fourth, which are E and A. I slowly start to introduce the different effects, like the impacts and the dubby effects, with a stripped down version of the drums entering for the second 8 bars of the intro. Along with the dubbed out grime bass, which also has the low end filtered out. There's a busy arrangement for the final 8 bars of the intro, and the strings melody from the B section of the drop comes in, but it's played an octave lower. Transposing melodies up or down an octave is an easy way to add variation, and it's something I'll often do when producing. You can hear that I'm utilizing the jungle samples as well. There's one at the beginning, and then there's this one at the end before we go into the drop. There's no sub bass until the drop comes in, and I thought this was a good way to make things more dramatic. We've already covered the first drop, which is 32 bars long in part 1, so I'm going to move on to the breakdown. Before I move on to the breakdown, I just wanted to remind you of the structure of the drops, as I'll reference parts of it throughout. So this is the first drop. In the drops, I'm using A and B sections, which are 8 bars long and which repeat twice per 32 bar drop. So that's A for 8 bars, B, 8 bars, A again, 8 bars, and then B again, another 8 bars. So, for example, when I say the legato melody from the A section, I mean this melody. And when I say the melody from the B section, I mean this melody. And this applies to all elements in their respective sections, although things do alter between different B sections. For example, so the strings melody from the first B section, which is the one that I just showed you, doesn't appear in the final B section. So that's the final 8 bars of the first drop, or the second drop for that matter. I've tried to make this as clear as possible, but if you still don't understand the structure, then as mentioned, the full track will be in the description for you to listen over, or you can always drop me a comment. So we're here at the breakdown. The breakdown is 16 bars long. For the first 8 bars, the drums remain, although the high percussion is stripped back. Again, we have the B section melody an octave down, like in the final 8 bars of the intro, as well as the saw and the grimy bass, also from the intro. As with the intro, there's no sub bass here, but you can see that I'm using quite a few of the dubbed out effects. So we've got the reverses. For the second 8 bars, the drums drop out and the dubbed out grime lead comes back, and the lack of drums helps the second drop hit harder. So in terms of the second drop, I often find the second drop to be the most challenging part of a track from a compositional perspective. You want it to be like the first drop, but I always think it seems lazy on the producer's part if they're exactly the same. As with the first drop, the second drop is 32 bars. However, there are some significant changes. The first 8 bars played you 4 there, but the first 8 bars are a hybridization of the A and B sections from the first drop. So the rhythm of the drums and the legato strings from the first drop's A section twinned with the rhythm of the bass from the first drop's B section, if that makes sense. But we do have some variation in terms of the notes as well. We've also got the wobble bass playing an A rather than an F, which you can see here. And the FX arrangement is also a mixture of the A and B sections from the first drop. The first B section of the second drop, so that's the second 8 bars, is very similar to the first B section of the first drop. Although the bass line played by the grind bass remains the same as the previous 8 bars. For the next A section, we've got the legato strings, but they're playing a variation of the melody from the A section. That's the only main difference there. And then for the final B section, it's identical to the final 8 bars of the first drop. So the final B section of the first drop. However, the grind bass is playing the bass line from the first 16 bars of the second drop. The outro is 16 bars long, and it's more or less identical to the breakdown. The only main difference is the breakdown has this little vocal at the end, one of the kind of dubbed out jungle vocals, but at the end of the outro, essentially just stops there without the sample. So here's the mix project. In terms of mixing, I followed a very similar approach to my bass house track mixing video, which will appear in the top right of the screen now. I didn't have the original version of Damascus to hand, so I've used a Gundam edit instead. Alongside Kahn and Neek's remix of Shotter by Royalty. One of the things I noticed in the Shotter remix is how saturated the claps are. So this is something I've tried to emulate in my track. I won't go over how important I think referencing is, because it's one of the things I talk about in the bass house video, but I'm emphasizing its importance again here. One of the first things that I mentioned that I do in the first video is that I tuned the kick drum, or I tuned this bassism plugin so that it's in the key of the track. I think it's actually an A, because I felt like, we'll see, actually, maybe it isn't. Yeah, I tuned it as an A because I felt like tuning it to E might mean that it's a bit low, so it wouldn't translate so well on smaller speakers. I had planned to use more than 2 delays on sends, but I didn't feel the need to do this because I think the track works as it is. I didn't end up doing a massive amount of automation either, although you could get creative with both delays and effects automation, as it does suit this style, particularly older deep medi Kahn tracks. You may remember that in the first video, I added some dub delays on individual channels. So there are about 4 or 5 different instances of delay plugins within the project. I did tweak a few things like the percussion arrangement in the intro. I think I just ended up getting rid of a few of the notes at the end. So it's just like a dead stop there. One of the things I did notice about Damascus, and this is from listening to both the original and the Gundam edit, which I have here, is that the percussion sounds very kind of thick and very crunchy. And I felt like some bit crushing had been used. So in the same way that I basically tried to make my claps sound kind of similarly saturated to the claps in the Royal T remix. It's not quite as aggressive, but I didn't feel the vibe of my track necessitated as much saturation as Shotta did. But I tried more to emulate Damascus because that's the main track I've been referencing throughout. I tried to achieve some of this crunchiness using saturation and bit crushing. It's a free bit crushing plugin called Crush, and I'm using it in parallel, and I'm making sure that I've filtered out the harsh high frequencies. Again, you can mess around with this to taste. So here with and without. Like, it just helps things sound a bit more crunchy. And it also helps to glue the high percussion together and give them a bit of a vibe. Yeah, and that's it. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. It's not quite as long as the first part. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them in the comments, and I'll see you next time for the next tutorial.